Hello and welcome again to DieCastRestos. Jason here, and today we're going to be restoring a BMW 323i Cabriolet. Now this model today is going to be a bit of a special one, as I'm going to be restoring it to replicate my brother's very own BMW, maybe a 318, not a 323, but we'll gloss over that fact. My brother and my dad put a lot of work in to get this car back on the road, so I'll be putting this model together as a birthday gift for him, nice and cheap and cheerful. So first of all, what we'll do is drill out those rivets, one on the front and one on the rear with this model, just giving it a little bit of rotation to get the edges off of that rivet. Next I'll use a 1.5mm drill bit on the rivet posts themselves. And then use a tap to thread those posts. Now this model is in pretty good condition as is, but this is going to be a special restoration project for me. My first custom. So once the parts are all separated, I'm just removing the wheels from underneath the metal suspension clip. And then they're ready for paint stripping. Now using the same paint thinner as I'd used for the previous video, I just make sure to give the front, insides and the entirety of the base a good covering. Now the model itself is a, I think you say Bauer model, which came with a Targa top roof and slightly different to a conventional convertible. Now my brother's version of the car of course did not have this, but I'm not going to make too many physical adjustments to it to try and replicate it. I'll just keep it original as much as I can. So after 10 minutes or so, the paint's already peeled away nicely. There's not too much damage to this vehicle, so it's going to be a quite straightforward job. Once all of the paint has been removed, all I have to do is just scrape away at some of the residual parts that have been left in the panel gaps. And just using a dental tool, just scraping away. Using a hand file, I smooth out some of the areas where there's a bit of surface damage. Unfortunately with this model, I forgot that it had wing mirrors, and upon clamping it in, it had weakened the A-pillar quite significantly. And this is going to be my first task, it is replacing that pillar there. Luckily I still have the part that came off. Now this is really going to test my patience. So what I did first was get some masking tape placed just inside the windscreen area to guide in the pillar. At first I used the tweezers to gently guide the post into position, but it tended to be easier to do with just my fingertips. Eventually it starts to stay in the right kind of place, but being an impatient man, this was a difficult job. Happy with the result, I apply some super glue to the top and bottom of the pillar. Just use the end of the tube just to guide it in a little bit there. And then once that's done, I just use a toothpick to spread it into the areas and wait for it to dry. While that's drying, I'm going to use some hot soap and water to rinse off the windscreen and the interior. Just giving it a quick scrub. The interior was a bit grubby and the windscreen had yellowed slightly. Now using some Humbrol model filler, I apply it liberally once the super glue has dried to the joins. This product dries very quickly and it sort of clumps together, so you have to work fairly quickly with this one. So once I've left that to dry for several hours, I start my filing again and then cue the bleeps. So I come back after applying a hell of a lot more super glue to firmly secure that pillar back in place, and applying quite a bit more on the inside as well. Much more sturdy. So once that one had dried, I file away at this one because it had turned into a kind of putty, which was quite easy to work. I was fairly happy with the result here. It is a lot more stable than it was. It doesn't look quite right yet, so it needs a little bit more touching up before we move on to the priming. Now once again for this job I use some Tamiya light grey primer. It's very fine, it's very good at the job it does. I'd highly recommend it, but then again I haven't used any other type of primer so far. Just making sure you cover all sides, and the underside's quite important here because a lot of that will be on display. Just checking all areas are done. Now the plastic grille, which also includes the sills and also the tow hook at the rear, there's incredible detail on the front end, but it looks like someone's chewed the tow bar. Using a pair of pliers, I'm just squeezing it back into shape. I don't want to modify this model too much whereby I'm removing parts like the tow hook. So onto the bodywork, I'm just going to use some more of the Humbrol filler again, just to seal up any areas that have been revealed by the primer. Applying a very fine coat and allowing it to fill those gaps. I'd also use the same primer for the base. There's quite a bit of detail in the space here. Now I'll move on to applying way too much autosol on this tiny little windscreen. Just using the best tool there is, your finger, spreading it around evenly and then rubbing against an old towel. Yeah, in future I'll never use quite as much as I've used here. This is far too much of the polishing product. It's come up a lot better once it's all clear. And what I use next is some wood floor polish. This one I picked up from a store called The Range for a whole £1.27. Highly recommend it because it did a great job. So I use it just in a small plastic shot glass. I use some tweezers to dunk the windscreen in, just submerge it for a moment or two and shake it dry, make sure that there's no drips. Did it a second time, just for safety's sake. Shaking all of the excess off, then popping it on a paper towel and covering with the glass. Making sure I could polish my desk as well because I've spilled a bit there. There we go. Shiny. Now on to painting the finer details on the front. After painting the fine details, I realised my brush was far too thick and I went out and bought some more fine acrylic paint brushes. But it's come out quite well. I was very pleased with my first real attempt at painting any significant detail. But the front end looks so much better once you've given it a little go over with the silver chrome pen. Now onto the actual coat of paint. I used Tamiya PS1, which is a polycarbonate spray. Usually reserved for RC car painting. The polycarbonate sprays have a bit of a rough finish, but I'm always sure to use a clear coat spray such as the Tamiya TS13. This gives it an extra layer of protection and an extra layer of shine. Even on top of the light grey primer, it seems to have come up quite nicely. Now on to painting some detail using some Tamiya acrylic X6. I first of all paint in the indicators, front and rear here. I'd also use some red X7 acrylic paint for the brake lights. I didn't film this part because I put my hands in front of the camera and none of the footage was any good whatsoever. Then I moved on to painting the interior, a more realistic grey material colour, which is the Dark Sea Grey XF54 acrylic paint from Tamiya. It was very good, it just needed a couple of coats all over and it gave quite a nice finish. I applied the silver paint for the reverse lights, once again using the silver paint from a Pentel paint marker. Here you can see the mess I've made with the red paint because my brush was far too thick. I've since touched it up a little. So here's a reminder then of what we started with. A fairly decent model all in all, just a little bit of play wear, but luckily all of the components intact. And here is the finished article. Hopefully my brother will be proud of it on his birthday coming up in May. It's my first ever custom and I'm quite pleased with the difference. There's not too much of work that really needed to be done. It was meant as a birthday gift, just something a little special and make all of those details stand out. It's just such a shame when diecast models don't have some of these basic details highlighted. So like the indicators, the door handles, the fog lights, the main lights, the grille, they all make a huge difference. I'd like to thank you all for watching. Please like and subscribe and I'll catch you again for the next one.